The first wedding guest screamed at exactly 7:14 p.m. I remember the time because I was standing on the far side of my north pasture, leaning against a fence post, watching 40 very determined heritage pigs disappear through a gap in a hedge line and march straight toward the most expensive wedding reception our county had ever seen. Within seconds, the beautiful string quartet stopped playing, champagne glasses hit the ground, and 300 well-dressed guests scattered across a manicured lawn like someone had pulled a fire alarm. A 5-tier wedding cake worth more than my first pickup truck lasted less than a minute. One pig climbed halfway onto the dessert table, another bulldozed through a fruit display, and a third somehow ended up dragging an entire linen tablecloth across the grass, while terrified caterers chased after it. The bride was crying, the groom was shouting, and the man responsible for all of it stood in the middle of the chaos with his face turning a shade of red I didn't think occurred naturally in humans. His name wasn't Jonathan Ashford, though. Around here, everyone knew him as Preston Hale, the new event director at Briar Ridge Estates, an exclusive wedding venue that bordered my orchard. And the funny thing was, none of this would have happened if Preston had simply paid for the apples he stole. I've spent most of my life growing fruit. My orchard sits on 60 acres that have been in my family for 3 generations. Every spring I prune every tree myself. Every summer I walk those rows before sunrise checking leaves, branches, irrigation lines, and signs of disease. By fall, the place looks like something off a postcard. 23 varieties of heirloom apples, each with its own personality, each with its own harvest window, each representing years of patience and work. I wasn't some hobby farmer growing fruit for decoration. This orchard was my retirement, my livelihood, and honestly, a big part of my identity. For years, Briar Ridge Estates and I got along just fine. Their guests loved looking at the orchard from a distance. Couples took engagement photos near the property line. Everyone respected boundaries. Then Preston arrived. He came from the city with expensive shoes, perfect hair, and the kind of confidence that makes people think they're smarter than everyone else. Within months, he had completely rebranded the venue. Suddenly, every wedding package promised an authentic countryside experience. Rustic elegance, farm-to-table dining, locally sourced ingredients. The kind of marketing language wealthy people love because it makes them feel connected to nature while spending $50,000 on a weekend party. One afternoon, Preston drove up my gravel driveway and introduced himself. He smiled the whole time, complimented the orchard, praised my reputation, and eventually got to the point. He wanted to buy apples for his events. At first, I thought we might have a legitimate business opportunity. Then he offered $2 a bushel. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. My apples sold for many times that amount. Some varieties were award winners. Restaurants from neighboring counties paid premium prices for them. When I explained that, Preston leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Well," he said, "I'm sure we'll find a cheaper source." I told him good luck and figured that would be the end of it. A few weeks later, I noticed apples missing near the fence line. Nothing major. A handful here, a handful there. I blamed deer at first, then raccoons, then maybe careless visitors. But the losses kept growing. Entire branches were stripped overnight. Fruit vanished from trees that weren't even close to public areas. Something wasn't adding up. So I installed trail cameras throughout the orchard. 3 nights later, I had my answer. Around midnight, a group of people crossed onto my property carrying baskets and flashlights. They moved with purpose, heading directly toward my highest value trees. The camera footage was crystal clear. The leader was Preston. Behind him were members of his catering staff. They spent nearly an hour filling baskets with fruit before hauling everything back toward the venue kitchens. I watched the footage 3 times because I couldn't believe someone would be that arrogant. The next morning, I walked into his office carrying printed screenshots. I expected excuses. Maybe denial. Maybe some ridiculous misunderstanding. Instead, Preston barely looked concerned. He glanced at the photos and shrugged. Then he actually told me I should appreciate the exposure my orchard was receiving through his events. Exposure. That's what he called theft. When I demanded payment for months of stolen fruit, he laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not embarrassed laughter. The kind of laughter that says he genuinely thought I was powerless. Then he said something I'll never forget. He leaned across his desk and said, "Neighbors share agricultural surplus all the time." Agricultural surplus. That's what he called thousands of dollars worth of premium fruit. I gave him 1 week to pay for every apple his staff had taken. 1 week. After that, I told him I'd involve law enforcement, insurance investigators, and anyone else necessary. Preston nodded like he was listening, waited for me to finish, and then went right back to answering emails. By the time wedding season reached full swing, the thefts weren't slowing down. They were getting worse. Every few nights his people slipped into my orchard. Every week more fruit disappeared. And every time I looked at those half-empty trees, I realized something important. Preston wasn't stealing because he needed apples. He was stealing because he believed there would never be consequences. What he didn't know was that consequences were already rooting around in a pasture less than half a mile away, waiting for the perfect opportunity to introduce themselves. Now, before I tell you what happened next, let me step out of the story for a minute, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand situations like this. According to standard procedure, when someone repeatedly enters private agricultural property and removes crops without permission, it stops being a neighbor dispute and starts becoming a property crime. The problem is that proving damages can take time, especially when the theft happens in small amounts over a long period. From a legal perspective, documentation is everything. Cameras, timestamps, inventory records, photographs. That's the difference between a frustrated accusation and a case that actually holds up. But what fascinated me most wasn't the legal side. It was Preston's mindset. This is a psychological trap many entitled people fall into. They convince themselves that because they can benefit from someone else's work, they somehow deserve access to it. The longer they get away with it, the more normal it feels. Eventually, they stop seeing boundaries altogether. And that's exactly what was happening here. Preston wasn't acting like a man worried about consequences. He was acting like a man who believed consequences only happened to other people. The opportunity arrived in late September, right as harvest season was reaching its peak, and wedding season was somehow becoming even more ridiculous. That's when I learned Briar Ridge Estates was preparing for its biggest event of the year. Preston's daughter, Madison, was getting married. This wasn't just another wedding. This was the wedding Preston had been bragging about for months. Every vendor in the county had heard about it. 300 guests, luxury catering, imported flowers, an orchestra, customized sculptures, and enough decorative lighting to make the property visible from space. People were talking about it like it was some kind of royal ceremony. Normally, I wouldn't care. Someone else's wedding isn't my business. But then I got confirmation from a former catering employee that nearly every apple-based dessert on the menu was being made with fruit taken from my orchard. Apple tarts, caramel-glazed pastries, cider reductions, specialty desserts for the VIP tables, all of it. The moment I heard that, something clicked. For months, I had been approaching the situation like a farmer dealing with a thief. Suddenly, I realized I needed to think like a farmer dealing with an event coordinator who had built his entire reputation around exploiting other people's work. The funny thing about farms is that most city people only understand the pretty parts. They love the scenery. They love the fresh produce. They love the rustic atmosphere. What they don't understand is that farms operate according to their own rules. Nature doesn't negotiate. Animals don't care about social status. And once certain chains of events begin, they become very difficult to stop. Now here's something important. I didn't train my pigs to attack anyone. I didn't release dangerous animals into a crowd. My herd consisted of heritage breeds I'd raised for years. They were friendly, healthy, and remarkably intelligent. But they also possessed one very predictable characteristic. When they smelled food, especially sweet food, they became highly motivated explorers. 40 highly motivated explorers, as it turns out, can create an impressive amount of chaos. On the evening of the wedding, I watched preparations from a distance. Vehicles arrived all afternoon. Caterers carried trays into giant tents. Musicians tuned instruments. Guests began filling the venue dressed in clothing that probably cost more than my tractor. Around sunset, I noticed servers carrying dessert displays into position. Then I saw something that made me laugh out loud. One decorative station featured baskets overflowing with apples. My apples. I recognized the varieties immediately. Years of growing fruit gives you an eye for details most people miss. There sat my northern crimson apples and my autumn golds, arranged like decorations in a luxury advertisement. Preston had literally stolen my harvest and turned it into centerpieces for his daughter's wedding. That level of arrogance almost deserved recognition. As darkness settled across the property, The reception reached full swing. Music drifted through the air. Champagne flowed. Guests mingled beneath elegant lighting. From a distance it looked perfect. That's usually when reality enjoys making an entrance. I walked back toward my pasture and opened a gate. That's it. No dramatic speech. No villain monologue. Just a gate. The herd noticed immediately. Curious snouts lifted. Ears perked up. Then the scent reached them. Hundreds of pounds of food spread across a reception lawn. Cakes, pastries, fruit displays, appetizers. Everything a pig could dream about. The first few animals trotted through the opening. Then the rest followed. Within minutes 40 pigs were heading directly toward Briar Ridge Estates with the confidence of tourists arriving at an all-inclusive resort. The first sign of trouble came when guests noticed movement near the hedges. Several people pointed. A few laughed because they assumed the animals were part of some rustic wedding attraction. Then the pigs reached the buffet area. That's when the screaming started. One large sow launched herself into a dessert display with astonishing enthusiasm. Another shoved through a decorative fruit table. Several others discovered the wedding cake. If you've never seen a determined pig encounter a $10,000 cake, consider yourself fortunate. The destruction was immediate and absolute. Frosting exploded. Decorative layers collapsed. Floral arrangements disappeared beneath a wave of excited livestock. Guests scattered in every direction. Some climbed onto chairs. Others sprinted across the lawn. One unfortunate groomsman attempted to block a pig's path and immediately learned why that was a terrible strategy. Meanwhile, the herd continued expanding its area of operations. Ice sculptures toppled. Tablecloths vanished. Serving trays hit the ground. Somewhere behind all the chaos, an orchestra stopped playing in the middle of a song. Then I spotted Preston. He emerged from the reception tent looking like a man whose soul had just left his body. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, panic, and pure rage in under 10 seconds. He started shouting instructions. Employees ran everywhere. Nobody listened because nobody had any idea how to manage 40 food-motivated pigs in formal wedding attire. Then Preston saw me standing near the property line. Even from a distance I could tell he knew exactly who to blame. He stormed toward me, nearly slipping on muddy grass along the way. "Get those animals out of here," he screamed. "Right now." I remember looking past him toward the reception. One pig had somehow acquired an entire section of tablecloth. Another was investigating a champagne station. The cake was beyond saving. Then I looked back at Preston and said the only thing that felt appropriate. "That's strange," I said calmly. "They must have smelled my apples." For a moment I thought he might actually explode. He pointed toward the destruction and started shouting about damages, liability, and lawsuits. But here's where the story took a turn neither of us expected. During the aftermath, investigators began documenting everything for insurance purposes. Vendors gave statements. Employees talked. Records were reviewed. Photos were examined. And eventually someone started asking questions about where certain ingredients had come from. That's when the theft finally caught up with him. Multiple staff members confirmed that fruit had been taken from my property for months. Camera footage supported it. Inventory discrepancies supported it. Witness testimony supported it. Suddenly the issue wasn't just a ruined reception. It was a business operation using stolen agricultural products. Insurance companies have many talents, but paying claims they can avoid isn't one of them. Once they discovered the circumstances, they denied significant portions of the claim. The financial fallout was brutal. Several guests reported injuries sustained during the chaos and pursued legal action against the venue. Vendors demanded payment. Reputation damage spread quickly throughout the event industry. Within days, Preston went from being the celebrated architect of luxury weddings to being the man who allowed a scandal to explode in front of hundreds of influential guests. Within a week, Briar Ridge Estates terminated his employment. Within 2 weeks, attorneys representing the venue contacted me about settlement discussions. And within a month, something remarkable happened. The same organization that had spent months taking my harvest suddenly became very interested in purchasing fruit legally. They offered premium pricing, compensation for documented losses, and reimbursement for damages connected to the theft. They wanted the entire situation resolved quietly and permanently. I accepted a settlement that more than covered my losses. More importantly, I finally received acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. Not because someone developed a conscience, but because reality eventually forced accountability into the conversation. And as I watched workers install improved fencing along the property line later that fall, I couldn't help noticing something ironic. Preston had spent months selling wealthy clients the fantasy of authentic farm life. In the end, authentic farm life was exactly what destroyed him. A few months after everything happened, life settled back into the rhythm I actually enjoy. The wedding guests went home. The lawsuits moved through whatever channels lawsuits moved through. The headlines faded, and my orchard returned to being an orchard instead of the center of county gossip. Every morning, I still walked the rows before sunrise. I still checked branches, irrigation lines, and fruit development. The trees didn't care about settlements or scandals. They just kept growing, the same way they always had. And honestly, there was something comforting about that. People ask me all the time whether releasing the pigs was worth it. The truth is, they're usually asking the wrong question. The real question isn't whether the outcome was satisfying. The real question is why things reached that point in the first place. Looking back, I don't think Preston's biggest mistake was stealing apples. Strange as that sounds, theft was only the symptom. The bigger problem was entitlement. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that other people's labor existed for his benefit. He saw years of work, investment, risk, and dedication, then mentally converted all of it into a free resource he could exploit. That's a dangerous way to think, because once a person starts believing boundaries don't apply to them, every decision afterward gets worse. They stop asking permission. They stop respecting ownership. They stop considering consequences. Eventually, they create disasters entirely on their own. This is a psychological trap that shows up everywhere, not just on farms. You'll see it in neighborhoods, businesses, workplaces, even families. Someone gets away with crossing a line once, then twice, then 10 times. Each successful violation becomes proof in their mind that the boundary never mattered. What they're actually doing is building a debt they don't realize exists. Sooner or later, reality sends the bill. From a legal perspective, the story offers another lesson that I think a lot of people overlook. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but documentation is usually more powerful in the long run. If I hadn't installed cameras, saved recordings, tracked losses, and kept records, nobody would have taken my claim seriously. According to standard procedure, evidence creates leverage. Emotions create stories. You need both if you want justice. That's one reason I always tell younger farmers, homeowners, and small business owners to document everything. The notebook you keep today might save you a fortune tomorrow. The lesson here is that protecting yourself doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. Another thing I've thought about is the difference between respect and appearance. Preston built an entire career around appearances. Fancy events, marketing language, curated experiences, perfect photographs. But genuine respect can't be staged. Respect shows up when nobody is watching. Respect is paying for what belongs to someone else. Respect is honoring boundaries even when violating them would be convenient. The irony is that if Preston had approached me honestly from the beginning, we probably could have built a profitable partnership. I sold fruit to restaurants, local markets, and specialty stores all the time. Fair offers got fair responses. Instead, he chose shortcuts. And shortcuts have a way of becoming expensive. As for the pigs, they're doing just fine. In fact, they accidentally became local celebrities. For months, people would drive past my property and point toward the pasture. Some even nicknamed the herd the Wedding Crashers. I wish I could say the pigs understood their role in the story, but they don't. As far as they're concerned, they simply followed a delicious smell and stumbled into the greatest buffet of their lives. Maybe that's part of why the whole thing still makes me laugh. The animals weren't motivated by revenge, greed, or pride. They were just being exactly what they were. Sometimes nature has a funny way of exposing human foolishness. So if there's one thing I'd leave you with, it's this. Never mistake patience for weakness. A lot of hardworking people stay quiet because they're focused on building something rather than fighting over it. Farmers understand that. Small business owners understand that. Homeowners understand that. But quiet people still have limits. And when someone repeatedly disrespects those limits, consequences eventually arrive. They may not arrive immediately. They may not arrive dramatically. But they arrive. Sometimes through courts. Sometimes through contracts. Sometimes through public embarrassment. And every once in a while, they arrive on 4 legs, weighing 600 pounds, heading directly toward a $10,000 wedding cake. What do you think? Did Preston deserve what happened, Or did things go too far once the reception was destroyed? Let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious where you draw the line between justice and revenge. And if you've ever dealt with an entitled neighbor, business owner, or HOA board that thought the rules didn't apply to them, I'd love to hear that story too.